Welcome to Daily Drive for Monday, May 11th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, Geely becomes the first Chinese brand to enter the Canadian market. Software-defined vehicles create a $20 billion cybersecurity problem, and Nissan slashes its tariff bill by more than $2 billion. Plus, Volvo's Anders Bell talks about how organizational changes help the automaker become a leader in software-defined vehicles.
There's no shame in domain. We will have domain systems that will be making kick-ass cars for many years to come.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. The race to be the first Chinese brand in the Canadian market is over. Geely is now exporting electric vehicles to Canada under a new Trans-Pacific trade deal, starting with 18 Lotus Electra crossovers that shipped late last week. Here's the backstory. Canada agreed in January to let in up to 49,000 China-built EVs a year at a 6.1% tariff. That's after slapping a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs back in October. The high-performance SUV is built in Geely's plant in Wuhan. Lotus has opened 6 Canadian dealerships so far and plans 6 more by the end of the year. And Geely's not alone. Chery and BYD are gearing up to enter Canada this year too. Software-defined vehicles are creating a cybersecurity problem for the auto industry. Modern vehicles have about 100 million lines of code. That's 100 million potential entry points for hackers. And a single vulnerability could hit millions of vehicles at once. According to a new analysis from Reuters Events, cyber attacks cost the global auto sector more than $20 billion in 2025. That's 20 times higher than 2022. And most attacks don't start with automakers. They start with Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers, where automakers have limited visibility. And Nissan slashed its tariff bill last fiscal year by $2.3 billion. It cut those costs 61% by ramping up U.S. production and pushing sales of vehicles built in Tennessee and Mississippi. The automaker expects to pay $1 billion or less in tariffs this fiscal year, down from $3.8 billion it initially faced. Joining me now to talk about Nissan's tariff strategy is our own Urvash Kakaria, who wrote about it on autonews.com. Urvash, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me, Kel.
All right, Urvash, give us more details about how Nissan pulled this off while other Asian automakers struggled with tariffs.
Yeah, so in the past year, Nissan has focused on its Made in America strategy. They have tried to maximize as many of the vehicles they sell in the US. They've tried to localize as much of that volume. So basically, in January of last year, about 40% of their U.S. sales were built at its 2 plants, one in Smyrna, Tennessee, and the other in Canton, Mississippi. In December of 2025, that percentage rose to 65%. And by late 2028, they plan to increase that production to 70%. And longer term, over the next 3 or 4 years, they hope to get that to 80%. And the way they're doing it is they're adding newer models to U.S. production. So in 2028, they will have a redesigned Rogue, which is their volume seller, but they're also going to bring an e-Power hybrid Rogue to market, which is expected to, over time, sort of be the majority of Rogue sales. So that will eventually get localized in 2028. And then further out, they've launched a new body-on-frame platform, which will support 5 vehicles. So local production will significantly ramp up in Canton, Mississippi. In addition to increasing production, Nissan has also increased sales of its US-made vehicles, primarily the Rogue, the Frontier, the Pathfinder, and the Murano. And they've done that by cutting prices, especially on the Rogue and the Pathfinder, but also having aggressive 0% financing for 60 months on those 4 utility vehicles. Finally, they've increased more U.S. content in the vehicles that they make in Mexico. So they make the Sentra and they make the Kicks in Mexico, which are, high volume vehicles for the U.S. market. But by increasing the U.S. sourced components, they're able to lower the tariff bill that they pay on those vehicles.
Now, Urvash, is that why Nissan is still building the Sentra and the Kicks in Mexico despite the 25% tariff?
That's correct. So Nissan had explored, as Automotive News reported, plans to move some of the Sentra production to the US. Sentra is their number two selling vehicle in the US. But essentially, the math doesn't work. If they move the production to the US and then also continue to build in Mexico, their costs will be still higher, and the price of the Sentra would go up, or the Kicks would go up more than what they pay tariffs on. So it's kind of they're stuck between a rock and a hard place until the 25% tariff comes down in Mexico. They are essentially absorbing the cost on these imports. They haven't increased the sales price significantly. However, they have significantly cut back on incentives. So in a sense, both these models have gotten a price cut in the US, which has also affected their sales. I spoke to Christian Bonnier, the chairman of Nissan Americas, and he said that Nissan is in talks with both the US and the Mexican governments to try and lower the price on these Mexican imports, especially the more affordable vehicles. Nissan really can't increase the price on these cars because their unique selling point in America, in the US, is that they are affordable and that they're lower cost. They're sub 30,000. And by moving production up here, that won't make sense. Munier has essentially called the tariff on Mexico cars as unfair, arguing that Mexico and Canada are the US neighbors and they have a 25% tariff. Meanwhile, South Korea and Japan have 10% tariffs. So, he is echoing several executives, automotive industry executives, wondering why our neighbors, which we have a trade agreement with, face such high tariffs.
Perfect. Very insightful, Urvash. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Software-defined vehicles are reshaping how automakers design and build cars, moving complexity from hardware to software and bringing more development in-house. Last month, S&P Global Mobility ranked Volvo and Chinese manufacturer NIO as the top automakers for SDV readiness in 2026. Anders Bell is Chief Engineering and Technology Officer at Volvo Cars. He joined our own Molly Boygan on the latest episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast to discuss how organizational and cultural changes at Volvo have accelerated its software-defined vehicle development. Here's a piece of that conversation.
Anders Bell, Chief Engineering and Technology Officer at Volvo Cars, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So a month ago or so, S&P Global Mobility published its SDV readiness scores for 2026, and Volvo and the Chinese manufacturer NIO got the top scores. So what do you think, from your perspective as someone who's been determined to be SDV ready, what actually makes an automaker SDV ready?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question, and I think it's good that S&P makes this effort to kind of start to normalize it, to be able to answer the question, what is an SDV? Because it definitely comes at different levels, right? Everybody talks about the software-defined vehicle these days, but it's a pretty wide definition. So having something we can all look at and say, hey, level 3, 4, 5, what is what, right? And of course, that definition didn't exist when we started the development of what is now the EX60 and the entire platform. So happy to have kind of be recognized from the outside of that we created something which is kind of tip of the spear automotive technology in 2026. But it's really like, I often get questions, even also internally, like, why all this? What's the SDV? What are we going to do with it? What does it do, right? And there's several different kind of paths to take into, depending on where you come from. Obviously, we start always with the customer. What's in it for the customer? And for us at Volvo Cars, it's really understanding what goes on in the real world in real time. We've always been extremely curious what happens in the real world, outside the labs, what's going on. So we always had like safety first. We've been obsessing about safety since the company was born almost 100 years ago. This is just to kind of give an example. we've always been curious of going out and find out. So we've been out since the 70s, basically checking accident scenes, measuring tapes, police reports, medical reports, working with insurance company to get data and all that. Kind of what's going on in the world, what did we miss, how can we make the cars better, safer, etc. And for us, that's kind of the primary. Now with the software-defined vehicle, full kind of open network where we have read and write possibility to the car, we can basically understand what happens in the real world in real time and feed that back into the drawing board. But we can also at the same time not only learn what we need to do better and can improve further in the next hardware generation, but also quickly what can we do with further with software improvements and provide back functionality. And this goes for all different domains on to the customer of improved functionality. How do we maximize the usage of the hardware that we have on the roads by unlocking functionality through software? Goes to all domains. It's far beyond just being able to update the infotainment domain, for instance. I think the second kind of entry into this, if I may, is the more industrial view or kind of more technical industrial view on the software-defined vehicle. So we've been building cars on domain-based systems for the last 20 or so years, which has served us extremely well. It's where you have basically your sensors and actuators behind an ECU, and then those typically come from the entire system comes from a tier one, and the job of the car maker and the OEM in that world is basically, to put a bit simplicity, is to make all those ECUs talk to each other with limited in-house software, and it's to a large extent a specification and coordination work, and the code is mostly written by tier ones. Nothing wrong with that model, but as functionality in the vehicles grow and the consumer's demand for digital integration and increased functionality grows, you just keep on building more and more hardware systems on top of each other. Eventually you will drown on the complexity or fall behind in the customer's expectations on features and functionality. So from this perspective, the software-defined vehicle is like a massive reset. Like let's simplify the hardware layer as much as possible and standardize it and look at it as a capability, and then move the complexity over to the software layer. So we can keep on kind of the S-curve of continuously spinning out meaningful functionality, safety, range improvements, anything that you might think of through software. So that perspective changes completely how you approach the product from a product development organization.
So do you feel like, you mentioned domain architecture and the movement towards zonal architecture, and, listeners of the podcast will remember from an explainer a few months back that, the contrast between those is ECUs and related functionality organized by domain, meaning, function sort of category versus zonal architecture, which is the physical zone of the car. Do you feel like that is really the key to being SDV ready, or is it some other sort of, you talked about moving the complexity away from the hardware toward the software. I'm just wondering what else Volvo is doing that is really like practically taking that a step forward.
It's kind of you as a car maker, legacy car maker coming from a domain-based world. You kind of slicing the car in a 90-degree. If you did it horizontally before, now you need to think vertically or the other way around. Doesn't matter, right? It's. I think the bigger part is the movement towards a centralized core compute, advanced zonal system is one of moving software in-house. That is the bigger move. It's not the architecture is required, because there is no, and it certainly wasn't when we started a few years ago on this journey, there is no solution to buy. It takes a car maker to make complete car software. So there's nobody to turn to. There are emerging bits and pieces of the stack that you can buy and increasing the size. But there is it's a movement of software from being something that is specified by us and done by somebody else to fully in-house becoming truly a software company. That is the bigger complexity. It's not changing the electrical architecture per se, but it's you need to approach it from a completely different end-to-end perspective.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like organizational architecture rather than vehicle architecture.
Big cultural challenges, organizational challenges to kind of get. We're in the business. All the people, a lot of the people listening to this podcast are in the business of creating the most complex consumer product known to mankind. And the car of 2026 is the physical object in the universe. I'm that big words here now, just to like make my point, that contains the most line of codes of any object created by humanity. It is a complex product, and on top of that, it's a 2.5-ton physical object that moves around in public streets, around schools, around people. So we need like safety requirements must be top notch. So it is hard, and moving all that software in-house and executing it and sitting as a car maker and allocating functions across your topology is something that you haven't done before, so you need to be humble approaching it.
Volvo's Anders Bell spoke with our own Molly Boygon. You can hear the full conversation on the latest episode of Shift, available now wherever you get your podcasts. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Urvash Kakaria and Yang Jian for their reporting for today's podcast. We also have reporting from Lois Jones of our sibling publication, Automotive News Canada. You can get the latest news on software-defined vehicles, Chinese automakers in Canada, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Unifor President Lana Payne about how Canada's largest auto worker union sees the state of trade with the U.S. as leaders look to renegotiate USMCA.
If we truly want to protect the Canadian auto industry, these are the kinds of discussions that we need to be having at the table. And it's in the Americans' interest to solve this problem too.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.